Hello YouTube, W&J's Handy Dad here, and today we're talking about all the things that you might want to know about the Crown Victoria Police Interceptor before buying your own, or maybe you've already bought one and now you're finding out all these things. Catalytic converters. Now, a civilian car, you probably won't run into catalytic converter problems. But in a police car, particularly one that's used for patrol and traffic use, probably spent a lot of time idling. And if you use Ford's formula of approximately 33 miles per idle hour, and you look at your idle meter, assuming you have one, and figure out the mileage, like on my car, it puts it up to, just under 300,000 miles, and my cats are going out. So that's pretty realistic for a car to need cats, 250, 300,000 miles, even though my odometer is only showing about 114. So just something to think about. If you get a police car, it's probably been idled a lot, and you're probably going to need catalytic converters a lot sooner than what you would if you just had a civilian vehicle. And of course, if you do your catalytic converters, you may as well do your O2 sensors as well. And there are 4 total O2 sensors. Intake manifold problems. That's probably the most common issue that I hear mentioned from other people. I guess the plastic, and then you have some metal. Like you see, mine has the metal there where the thermostat housing is. I guess because plastic is more susceptible to heat damage, and so over time they develop leaks. So yes, on one hand, the 4.6 is quote-unquote almost bulletproof, but if you're going to have issues with the 4.6, assuming you've done all your maintenance like you're supposed to, most likely you're probably going to have an issue with the intake manifold leaking. Spark plug spitting. So the Crown Vic uses very shallow spark plugs. There's not a lot of threads on them. So because the threads are so shallow, these are really susceptible to spitting the spark plug. They're really sensitive to the torque setting, and so obviously if your Crown Vic has never had the spark plugs changed, which is entirely possible if you're buying it from a police auction, they're probably in there, and obviously however many miles your Vic hasn't spit one. But if someone has changed the plugs and they were careless at all about torquing them, they're really susceptible to both over torquing and under torquing. And obviously over torquing can damage the threads and make them spit the plug, ripping basically out of the cylinder head, and so you end up with damaged threads that you probably have to put some sort of insert in to fix. If they were under torqued, which if you use a torque wrench and follow the torque settings that they give you, me personally, I found less than 15 foot-pounds, even though that's within the acceptable range, is too loose and they can start to unthread. So the good news about an unthreading damage is typically the plug will just unthread and then shoot out, which doesn't damage the cylinder head, but it will rip out the coil pack, and so you'll have to replace the coil pack on that cylinder. If you run across that problem while driving, you want to pull over immediately, and if nothing else, disable the fuel injector on that cylinder. For example, if this coil pack blew out, you'd want to disconnect the fuel injector right there. So just clip it, pull it off of there. Although it's not pleasant to drive with the blown out spark plug, you can at least get home. Ask me how I know. But if you leave the fuel injector plugged in, then you're spraying fuel, which is being pressed out as the piston is pumping up and down, and so that could create a fire. So that's why you want to pull over immediately and unplug the fuel injector. The symptom for a blown out spark plug, you'll hear a loud bang, and then it'll sound like you have an exhaust manifold gasket leak. So very loud, and I'll put up some video of what it sounds like with a blown plug. Transmission. So it's not necessarily that you have a bad transmission. Crown Vic transmissions ought to give you at least 150,000 trouble-free miles. But what I'm getting at here is it's very possible that they never changed the transmission fluid filter. Particularly if you have a drain plug on your transmission pan, it's very possible that they got lazy, and if they changed fluid at all, they just drained, 5 or 6 quarts out, refilled it with 5 or 6 quarts, and never ever changed the filter. So one of the first things you probably want to do if you have one of these cars is go ahead and drop the transmission pan, change out the filter, and you may even find that little yellow plastic plug sitting in the bottom of your pan. If you find that, then you know that they've never dropped the pan ever, because that yellow plug comes from the factory. Don't worry, you can throw away that plug, you don't need it, but like I said, if you find it in there, then you know your pan's never been dropped, which means your filter's never been changed. So just changing out the filter, and of course the fluid, could fix any shifting problems that you have. I know there's a lot of talk, and obviously I'm going to go with the majority on this. If your fluid is really burnt looking, dark brown or blackish color, then you probably don't need to change your transmission fluid, and just know that your transmission is shot and you're going to have to replace your transmission eventually, but just basically drive it till it stops running. If your fluid has still got mostly a reddish color, then I would go ahead and change your fluid and just start changing it regularly, or maybe overly regularly, and hopefully extend the life of your transmission that way. Now that's just what I do. You can choose to do whatever you feel is best in your situation. Obviously there's not really an easy way to say whether the fluid is at the level that it's burnt or not. It's just more of a opinion. If it looks more brownish or blackish, then that's showing more wear than the reddish color. And if you've never seen new transmission fluid, open up a bottle, take a look, you see it's a bright red color. To check your fluid without dropping the pan or anything, just pull your dipstick and dab it on a white paper towel, and that should give you a good idea of what color your fluid is. So this is what you do. Just pull the dipstick and get a dab of fluid on there, and you see mine, it's a pinkish color. See, mine's kind of a pinkish color. I would say that is not burned, that is a good fluid, and so I will continue to change my fluid regularly. I have a drain plug on my transmission, which definitely makes it easier, so most likely what I'll do is drain, it comes out about 5 or 6 quarts, refill, and then maybe every second or third time I'll actually change out the filter as well. But I don't think this is a bad maintenance thing to do, as long as, like I say, you're starting out with good fluid, which shows that it's been changed regularly. Like I said, if yours comes out a dark brown or black color, then it's up to you to decide whether it's too far gone. But just know that if you don't change it, then at some point you're going to have to replace your transmission, which is obviously a lot more money than just changing out fluid. And there's my power steering reservoir, and you can see that the fluid is a nice bright red color. Crown Vic uses transmission fluid in the power steering, not quote-unquote power steering fluid. Believe it or not, when I got this car, the fluid in there was a white color with a little bit of a brown burn to it, which means whoever changed it for the department before I got this car put in power steering fluid instead of the correct fluid. So it still worked with the power steering fluid in there, and honestly I couldn't tell you if there's a harm to the car of using power steering fluid instead of the transmission fluid, but I'm just a purist, so I use what's recommended. So I went ahead and flushed mine out, basically just kept draining it, refilling it, draining it, refilling it. It was kind of a pain, but I got it to where the fluid was back to the red color transmission fluid, and seems to be working very well. Brake fluid, I don't think they ever change. Every police vehicle I've gotten, the brake fluid was a blackish color, and so you can see there in the sunlight, looking through the aged and oxidized master cylinder there, that mine is cleared up since I flushed it, although it's probably about time to flush it again already. So shout out to the Texas Law Dog. He posted a suggestion, and I was like, I can't believe I didn't think of this. If you buy your vehicle from the police department via auction, at least in Texas, cities are required to follow the Open Records Act, and you can do an open records request and get all of the maintenance records and basically everything about the vehicle. Now, of course, a lot of cities are going to try to avoid providing that information to you, but by law they have to provide it via open records request, as long as you pay the fees to copy the records and so forth. Other states may or may not have a similar law, so you just want to check in your state if you have a similar law. But certainly for Texas, that's a nice thing to be able to get, and then you'll know if all these fluids that I've been mentioning in this video were, replaced on schedule, or maybe they weren't following the schedule because they weren't looking at the idle hours and that sort of thing. Probably the biggest issue that you will run into if you buy really any police vehicle is cut wires. When these vehicles are originally purchased, they go through the process known as upfitting, where they add all the police equipment. When they retire them and they put them back to public sale, I jokingly refer to it as downfitting, where they take all the police equipment out. The difference between the upfitting process and the downfitting process, from my observation, having bought several police vehicles, is in the upfitting they do it very professional, and the downfitting, it's like they go through with a saw and a wire cutter and just start ripping stuff out, and they really don't care what sort of damage they do. So what you will most likely find are hot wires that are just hanging places, and obviously you don't want to have exposed hot wires just hanging in your car, because if they touch the ground, best case scenario, you'll just get a quick spark or a blown fuse. Worst case scenario, if something's not wired properly and it stays hot like that, you could have a fire. So I would highly recommend going around and finding all the wires. Like mine had a headlight flasher unit right here, just cut wires, and then the wires going to the headlights were just cut and exposed as well, so I had to fix those up. And I went ahead and took this all out because there were just so many wires here that were just cut, it looked ridiculous. You'll find the wires typically here under the hood, also underneath the glove box area, possibly in the trunk, and anywhere else that they've done stuff. If you've got like the security system that requires you to push a button before you can take the car out of park, or if you've got one of those systems where you can push a button, take the key out, and the engine will stay running, but the car can't be stolen, they may have just cut wires for that. And then, a lot of you don't have a horn, and that's because When these are in service police vehicles, the horn, when the lights are activated, acts as a siren chirp. And so they typically will wire in a relay that when the lights are off, the horn works. When the lights are on, it chirps the siren. When they downfit, they just usually cut that out. So a lot of times they don't reattach the horn wires at all. So before you go for a bunch of major surgery on your car, you want to look and see if they've just cut the horn wire somewhere, probably under the glove box. Reconnect it and your horn starts working again. It's possible that it's cut elsewhere, but that's the most likely area, because think about it, if you're putting in that system, you're going to want it to be easily accessible for you. So you're not going to rip apart the whole dashboard just to cut a wire. You're going to find a wire where it's easily accessed and cut it there, rather than making extra work for yourself. Probably one of the other major issues that you'll have with your car is the paint. Now this is a twofold thing. Number one, most likely you had light bars or other emergency equipment. There's going to be holes drilled either in the trunk or roof or both, maybe in the A-pillars for spotlights or anywhere else that they needed to drill a hole. Every vehicle I've gotten at an auction or seen at an auction either just had the holes just left in the vehicle exposed to the elements, or they've been crudely filled with RTV or something along those lines. So that's something that you're going to have to address. You can't have open holes or you're going to have rust and other water damage in your car. If you can tolerate just having an RTV fill, obviously that will seal the hole, at least to keep water out. Of course, in my opinion, it looks bad, but you can do what you want to do. Number two is probably the condition of the paint is going to be worse than a typical used car. Now think about this for a second. You can probably figure out why Crown Vic's and other police vehicles' paint job is usually not as good as a civilian one. And no, it's not because they're not painted as well or using cheaper paint or anything like that. If you think about it, most police vehicles are exposed to the elements close to 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So rain and sun, and if you're up north, snow and salt on the roads and that sort of thing are all tearing apart your paint. Number two, are any of them professionally detailed? I bet not. So when they're washed, they're most likely going through an automatic car wash. And call me crazy, but I don't like automatic car washes. I think they're way too abrasive and abusive to the paint, whether it's acids that they're using or just, you know, contaminants in the brushes and so forth. But even the touchless ones, you can just, if you are an immaculate detailer of your vehicles like I tend to be, and then you take them to the automatic car wash, whether it's touchless or otherwise, you can really notice how it really starts to tear down the finish. You take a car that's run through the automatic car wash all the time and exposed to the elements close to 24 hours a day, and you can figure out why by the time you get the car, the paint is in bad shape and may need more than just a good buffing and waxing. So certainly a good buffing and waxing will make it look better, but coupled with all the holes and so forth, you're probably, if you're wanting the car to really look nice, you're probably looking at having to get it painted ultimately. In my take on painting, rattle cans are okay for short term. You may possibly get your car to look decent with the rattle cans, but they're not going to last. So ultimately, if you're wanting it to look right, you've either got to do a professional paint job yourself if you know how to do that, or at least take it to some place like Mako, where if you do the prep work and so forth and they just paint it, it should turn out all right and give you at least a few good years of looking right. And I'm certainly not knocking on Mako, because the few times I've needed body work, they've actually done better than the so-called professional places. If you're lucky, a lot of the newer auction vehicles seems like they're saving the back seats and including them with the vehicle. It may not be installed, but a lot of times they just give you basically a brand new back seat, because when they buy the car and they upfit it for police work, you know, they take the back seat out, put in the prisoner system. And a lot of the departments nowadays are smart, and they're saving those seats in a warehouse somewhere, and then when they sell the car, they're giving you those seats. So it makes for an attractive buy, because you're getting a brand new back seat in your car. But you have to assume that you're not getting a back seat, particularly with the Crown Vics. If they're not showing a photo with a back seat in it, I always assume that there's no back seat. And so factor that in, either a junkyard trip or trying to find one online or something like that. Same thing with center console. Most of the time they just rip everything out and leave you, bare metal there, or if you have the rubber floors covering it, just bare rubber floor there. And of course, we're all familiar with the rear door and rear windows being disabled in some fashion or form. If you're lucky, it's like mine, you have all of the hardware there. They've just either pulled the pin from behind here and like cut a wire on here or something like that. Also, these, if you've seen my video, there's a connector in the B pillar on both the driver and passenger side that you can check and see if they just disconnected, if they knew what they were doing. If they didn't know what they were doing, there's no telling what they've cut. Mine, they knew what they were doing on here, but they didn't know what they were doing on here, so they actually pulled this up and cut wires. Thankfully, it was right at the switch, so I could fix it instead of cutting them somewhere else. But particularly the Crown Vic is set up to be a police car, so all of these type of things that police like, such as the doors and stuff being disabled, the Crown Vic is set up to handle that professionally, so you're not having to cut wires and rip things out. But if you're unlucky and you have someone that didn't know what they were doing, it's very possible that they ripped the entire door rod out of the car or did something like that, or even you may have just a blank panel here, which that's the least desirable in my opinion if you're wanting this for a personal vehicle. So factor that in. If you see pictures of the inside of the back doors, you'll know at least what you have. If you don't have access to that, then I would assume the worst case. I would assume that you don't have this set up and just plan accordingly. The other thing you have to assume is that all of your light housings, whether it's headlights, tail lights, reverse lights, side marker lights, you have to assume that they've drilled holes in them and had police emergency lights in them, and then have ripped those out and left those holes exposed. You want to go through, and if you know what it's basically ducting tape, it's an aluminum tape, it's not duct tape, not DUCT tape, it's an aluminum tape, metallic tape. It's used for sealing up ducting, like in air conditioning business and stuff. Take that tape and seal up all the holes, and that will keep the water out, because if you don't, what I found is all of the lights that have those holes in them will fill up with water under the right circumstances, whether it's hard rain or certain angle from the car wash or whatever. A filled up light housing that's filled with water and a light with electricity flowing through it is not a good combination. This is duct tape, DUCT, and this is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this kind of tape. You may hear it referred to as silver tape or air conditioning ducting tape, something like that. But it's basically like a aluminum, real sticky, and it's great for covering up where they've got holes in the back of these housings where they had the strobe lights and so forth. Something you might not think of is this gap up here. Basically, you got your rear view mirror, and there's a abnormally large gap above it, and that's because most of the time they'll put emergency lighting up there. But when they remove that, you wouldn't realize it unless you've, I mean, basically, if you've driven civilian quote-unquote cars all your life, the mirror is going to be higher up. And so when you're driving and the sun comes at a certain angle, you know, maybe 4:30, 5 o'clock at night, the mirror blocks it from you, and then obviously you have your sun visors come down. Well, in these Crown Vics, with the mirror lowered like that, and you flip down the sun visors, you still have a gap there, and it can be very blinding. So you see, I've built this out of Kydex. I've got a video on the measurements of it and so forth, but I just put that up there, and it seems to help block the sun. And of course your lights, what we affectionately refer to as dark mode. You may find that when you open the doors you have no lights. If you're lucky, it's just as simple as they've pulled the bulb out of there. I know some people talk about taking it to the dealer and having the computer quote-unquote flashed to activate it. You know, on the older models there was just a wire that you could connect or disconnect to switch between dark mode and not dark mode. If you don't want to take yours to the dealer and you have a newer model, but you do want the light to come on when you open the doors like mine does, it's pretty simple to do. You can actually, the wire that powers the internal lights runs all over the car, and there are switches when the doors open that ground. So basically you just set up a relay that triggers off of that door ground and sends power to the dome light wire, and then you can just tap in and put lights anywhere that you want in your vehicle, and bypass going to the dealer and having it flashed. And of course, even if you do go to the dealer and have it flashed, you still probably need to add lights wherever you want them. My personal preference is having it very bright when you open the doors, and so, you know, I've added lots of extra lights, including these in the back, what I'm calling reading lights. I did them in red because red doesn't tend to affect your night vision, and so if my rear passengers are using these to read with, it doesn't affect my ability to drive. And basically I just added that switch there on each passenger door, and it just triggers only their reading light to come on, and it's with keyed power, so it only works when the car is running. And that way, if my kids leave it on and I park the car, it doesn't run down the battery. So with the digital dash, which, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's 2005 or 2006 and up, the problem you will run into most likely first is right above the certified calibration there, your digital odometer will start to go dim. My understanding is it's just a soldering issue, so when that happens to mine, I'll shoot a video on how to fix that. If you have the old style dash, there's a good chance that one or more bulbs will be burned out, and you'll actually start having dark spots in your dash. And you know, basically the fix for that is just pulling that piece out and replacing the light bulbs. If memory is correct, those are 194 bulbs, and there's several of them. If you pull yours out to fix, just go ahead and replace all the bulbs. You don't want to replace one or two and then put it back together, and then a week later have to pull it apart again to change another bulb. And climate controls, the default is defroster, and that's obvious so that, you know, it's unsafe to drive with a fogged up window. So if your defroster is not working, then you're in trouble. Whereas, you know, air conditioning and heat is just more of a comfort issue. The defrost is a safety issue. So if this system breaks, chances are your air is only blowing out of the defroster vents, and that's the normal broken state, and that requires either a vacuum fix, or depending on what else, you may have to take apart the dash and change out, blend door or things like that that are underneath the glove box area but not easily accessible. And of course, you'll find all sorts of weird cosmetic problems where they've cut things, or they've put self-tapping screws in because they didn't know how to reattach something, or they smashed some piece in and broke the retaining clips off of, or they've just cut things out. You'll just find all sorts of random stuff like that. Either live with it, or if you can't live with it, go to the junkyard, see if you can find a replacement part, or even online looking for a brand new replacement. And a very common problem is the lighting control module going bad. Several years are under warranty and recall, so you want to find out if your lights start acting up. You want to contact your dealer, see if it's a recall issue, and they'll fix it for free. If not, then you'll have to decide whether it's worth trying to buy a new part and do it yourself, or try to rig up a system of relays and bypass it, or whatever you want to do, or if you can, possibly living with the problem. Fuel pump cutoff. So I'm not talking about when your car is running. I'm talking about when you're going to refill the tank and you put the nozzle in and it pumps a teeny bit of gas and cuts off. So you can flip the nozzle upside down and kind of trick the system into letting you get some gas, although you have to be careful, because I did that one time and it didn't shut off and it started spewing gas out the filler neck there. So just be cautious if you're doing that. But if it's cutting off all the time, it's a problem with your EVAP system. I did a video of that. Basically, it's a little canister underneath the trunk area, and depending on the year model you have, it may be more easily serviceable than other years. So just check the hoses to see if they're clogged up with dirt or bugs or things like that. And if the canister itself is all clogged up, you might be able to clean it out with brake clean or something like that. Put it all back together, and hopefully it starts working the way it's supposed to. Which mine, it started cutting off. I cleaned out the EVAP system. It's been about a year, and I think only one time did it cut off on me unexpectedly in that year. So it seems the fix that I did seems to have solved the problem. Well, hopefully I remembered all the common issues. I'm sure I forgot one or two. Please let me know in the comments if you're thinking of one that I forgot. Thank you for watching. Hope you liked the video. Appreciate a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And please tell your friends about my channel. Thank you very much.